Okay, so we're going to talk about materials. And this is really the crux of everything. You know, you can have the nicest model, but if you don't have it materialed well, both in SketchUp and moving into renderings, you know, it can really fall apart. And I know this is one big thing that Mitch is really harping on, and something that Rebecca has been spending a lot of time on. Rebecca and I have been working on trying to really build up our material library, but that's the one piece that really can use a lot of work. Um, so I'm going to show you kind of the basics of materials and some advanced techniques of materials as far as how to use them, how to manipulate them, and all that sort of stuff. And then really the tangent piece to this that is going to be outside the realm of this class is us finding and creating an even better material library. But that's going to be kind of just discussions as we move forward in general. So the first thing I really want to talk about is getting down to the very basics. And a lot of this you guys might know, but just in case, we're going to start at the basics. And really, we're going to look at defining um, kind of colors versus textures. As you know, in SketchUp, you can paint something as a color, or you can apply a texture, which is essentially a JPEG that's been mapped or linked, you know, to the material itself. Uh, Even just, you know, for examples, like you can see here, this is just simply two different colors, and you know, something like this would be a texture. It's just more of just having the nomenclature uh, kind of work through and on the same page. So the next piece would really be looking at our material browser. Uh, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this thing, but just to really make sure you understand all the different pieces about it. Uh, I have mine inside of the default tray, but you can have it wherever. But this one here, this materials, uh, just a couple of quick things that, again, you may or may not know. Uh, you know, this is the material that's obviously currently selected. And if you want to switch to the default material, you know, you can press this button here and that switches to the default material. Um, then this button here, the home button, if you click on it, all it does is bring you to show you the page that has all the materials that's built within your model versus materials that select. These are the ones that are inside the model. And which then brings you to here, which is getting to select what material libraries you want to deal with. And obviously there's a decent number of ones that come built in with SketchUp. Um, but really we're trying to build up our own library. And here, in case you guys don't know, this is where you add in libraries. This details button, and here you can go to, first you need to go to open or create a collection. So when you go here to open, um, on mine, you know, it's here under SketchUp, and then I have, I believe it's this one here, yeah, materials. Actually, no, sorry, it's a different one. SketchUp library or SketchUp materials. This is the one we use, and I'll talk more about these in just a second. Um, but I believe that um, down there, if anybody knows offhand, this is what the I believe the architects, then uh, library, SketchUp, and then it's the same thing, the SketchUp materials. So this is the one here, the M library, SketchUp materials. This is where we're going to put all of our final materials, and that's really going to be the idea. So once you open it, you then can click Add Collection to Favorites, and what that does will add it down here at the very bottom, so you can quickly jump to whatever material libraries you like. And in fact, you know, I have this SketchUp materials, which is the one that we just talked about, but I use this basic material set, which is kind of just a collection of very standard, typically used materials. I actually, even though that's within this folder, I actually pinned that one as well, essentially. And so I can jump to that one. And this just has a lot of very basic things that I use a lot of. So then that's you're basically adding in collections, and you can add as many as you like and what works for you. You can change from small thumbnails to large thumbnails to extra large. Large typically works for me, but again, it's whatever you want. You know, or if you're used to seeing names, you can actually go to list view. And eventually I want to get all these named in a very specific way, but that's just such a tall order right now. um, so then we're going to get into editing materials. This is really where the fun starts to begin. So I'm just going to add something in here. Let's just say the brick. We'll zoom in on it a little bit. So this is good. We're going to deal with basic editing of materials and somewhat more advanced editing of materials. But to start with, and again, a lot of these things you guys probably already know, but just to go through everything. One of the easiest ways I like to deal with the HLS, the hue, saturation, and lightness. And really the one that I use most here is just the lightness, because a lot of times we'll come across a material that we like, but we want to lighten or darken it, and here you can simply drop it down and make it really light or make it really dark. It's probably a much better example using a wood. That's usually where that kind of thing happens. Or even a stone, but I'll just throw a wood on here. It's gonna. So then again, you know, we like this wood, but maybe we want to try something lighter, and so we just drop down the lightness. And so now you have more of like an oaky kind of wood versus a more mahogany kind of wood. You can run into issues with this. In fact, some of the ones that I've seen. Go here. I think it's one of these roofs. I think if you start getting a little too dark or too light, it's not really happening. That's actually working out pretty well. Even though this is an ugly material, I think this is one that will, yeah, you see how if I go too light, it really just gives some funky color reactions. So it's definitely one you have to be careful of, and you might only be able to do, you know, adjust things to a certain degree. Anyways, just something to be aware of. The saturation is just what it sounds like, you know, how much gray tone to full color it is, you know, so all the way to the left is 0 is no saturate, or is 0 saturation. So it's only grayscale. Going all the way to the right is full saturation. But again, you can see you can get some funky color results, so you got to be careful with that one. And then nice button, if you've never used it, this reset color, this will actually bring it back to its original color. So that so if you get too far off from something, you can always adjust with that as well. And then the obvious, if the one that's probably typically more used is the RGB, which is a little trickier to use, but if you're trying to really adjust the color to something, you know, you just got to play with it so it stays within the same hue family essentially, but you're adjusting colors. And then aside from that, the other aspect is you can adjust scale. And I'm sure you guys have all done this. Right now, this is at a scale of 4 foot wide by a little over 2 feet tall. And I can just say if I want to double it and make it 8 feet. And so that's how you scale. And if you if you adjust one, it adjusts the other. If you don't want that to happen, for whatever reason, you want to change it only in one, you can click this chain, which will delink the two, and now I can adjust this to say 16 feet in the X direction, but it's staying at 4 feet in the Y. And then lastly, we have opacity, and this is just where you simply adjust opacity. So that's basic material editing. Just this, I don't really need to adjust it, but let's put it back to what it was. So again, I'm sure all of that or most of that you guys already know, but it's always nice to go over it. And one little trick I like to do is, you know, say we have a wood color here. Let's just grab a quick wood. And sometimes Mitch will be like, I want to match that wood color and add the frames to the window to be the same color, but it's not going to be wood. You can actually, if this is another nice quick one, this eyedropper here, you can sample the paint. So if I'm, say, selected on this wood cherry, but I want this one, I can click this eyedropper and click anywhere, and it loads it into my bucket. Or on the fly, and this is the, I hardly ever, if never, use this icon. If you press the Alt key, it'll change your paint bucket. You got to be on the paint bucket first, but it'll change your paint bucket if you press the Alt key to the eyedropper, and you can load it in. So it's just a nice quick way to be able to change what material is active. So with that, once I make this material active and go to edit, what I really look at, and I like the HLS, so they tend to be easier numbers to remember, but I'll just memorize these 34, 13, 27, and I can actually try and make this wood or this shingle match this wood color. Let me, now that I said that, I forgot it. 34, 13, 27. So if I just adjust this 34, 13, 27, you can see that it gets these shingles pretty close to this. So it's just a nice quick way of adjusting materials without making all new materials. So that's how I like using that. So now we understand the basics of materials and quick editing. We're going to quickly look at how materials can be used and how they function. In fact, so I have two groups here. They're identical. They're groups, not components. I'm actually going to explode this one because it's important to understand how materials work with groups and components and such. As we've talked about before, this is down to what I call surface level. This is group level, so I'm not touching any of the actual like surfaces or lines or anything. But here I'm actually touching each surface. So if I load, say, this red, and I can paint this one surface, and I can click on and paint whatever surfaces I want and change them, whatever. Now a group, if I paint the group, you guys all know that if it's a default material on the inside, which was what this white is, then the whole group will paint that color. But what's important to realize is, or to understand, is the hierarchy of application of materials. And this is where the surface level really needs to be understood. Because even though I painted this group, this green color, if I go inside of this, and now editing this, and you can see I'm now at the surface level, and I paint the surface level, as far down as you can go, that is what will override the higher level materials. So you can paint down at the surface level, and then the group itself will never be changed. So you can see I can paint the group red and the whole thing turns red, but if I paint the group green, everything turns green except for that surface that I originally painted inside of the container. So again, it's just an important thing to just know, looking at the different hierarchies. And similarly, dealing with components, it's really the exact same thing. You can see that if I paint this surface green, these two are components, so you obviously, both of these turn green wherever I painted it because they're components. But what's interesting is the components are only identical on the inside of the container. If I paint the outside of the container, say this red color, this one turns red, this one does not. Even though these are components, the container itself is not a component, if that makes sense. Only the stuff contained within the container is a component. So I can paint these really any color I want. Let me go back to red. Let me grab it. In fact, I'll just click on a wood. So you can see I can paint this whatever I want, even though these are components. That they are different because I'm painting the container, not inside. And that's why, for the most part, there's very few times that I break this rule, but for the most part, I'm always trying to paint at a surface level. Um, Sometimes it makes sense just to, if you just have like a massive number of things and you just want to paint the group once and be done with it, but you just have a lot more control over painting the surface. And we'll get more into that in just a second as well. Now, looking at that trick that we just did, I painting the face one color, and the group or the each component changes that face, and then coming back and I could paint um, each component a different color. What's nice is I can still edit this, and they're components and they match each other, but I can have them different colors. And where one example that comes to mind that works well is, say, maybe making a component of an awning or a chair that you want to have, like a lounge chair, let's say. And here, this whole thing looks white, but every other stripe I have painted as this M00 white, and every other one is painted as default material. So even though these are components, if you want to picture this as an awning or picture this as a lounge chair, I can then come in and say, I want this one to be green and I want this one to be red. And so if I ever need to adjust the awning is a component and will adjust across my model, but the container is painted different colors. And so I can have different colored lounge chairs or whatever. And again, you can use this for whatever you need to. But it's just such a quick and easy way to manipulate components and make components feel different even though they're not. So that's just really the importance of understanding the hierarchy of painting. And then something else to be very aware of. Let me come back here. I'm going to paint this whole thing back to my default material. So now if you see, I painted this whole thing default, but yet everything is still green. That's because this container is painted green. So once it's a default material, then the container material overrides. So I'm actually going to come back here and paint this default. And I'm going to pull this aside. Now, if I come in here and do paintbrush, and I'm going to hit my Alt key and select this, you can see that it's showing up as default material. That's what it is. Now, if I go outside the container and I select, say, this wood, I paint my container wood. If I come back inside here, it's going to still show me that it's wood just because that's what it's being represented right now. But just to prove again that it's not actually wood, I can paint this as red because it's overriding. But if I come back in and paint everything default, it goes back to wood. And again, this is a component of this, but this one's wood and this one's not. Now, the point that I want to get to is to be very careful about exploding things, because even though this is the container's painted wood, but everything on the inside is painted default, if I explode this, then my default actually turns into wood. And that actually happens similarly with layers. You could have everything on the 0 layer inside of a container, but the container on a particular layer. Once you explode it, the layer will get applied to those pieces. So again, it's just more something to be aware of when you explode things. So that is really looking at hierarchy. Now a cool plugin, let's just do this to here. And I believe you guys have seen this before, but I'm just going to paint this one, this wood, and let's go this one, this wood. There's a plugin. Let's see if I can find it just to show you guys which wrong one. Called Material Replacer, and I use this one a lot. This one's especially great when you're designing in a model with with Mitch or whatever, or clients right there. I believe it's this one, this Material Replacer by ThomThom. Yeah. This one right here, it's a great one if you don't have it installed already. Um, and what's great is I can have, let's just copy a ton of these. And so I have a whole bunch of these and say, uh, Mitch is like, you know what, I don't like this light color wood, let's put the dark color wood. I would have to come in here and come back and paint each one of these, which could be annoying. So the nice thing about this material replacer, that's going to do, is I actually have a hotkey of F4, but all it is, I believe, is extensions. It's in here somewhere. I don't even know where they are because I never look for them this way, but I have F4 as my hotkey, and I say I want to replace this wood. We want to get rid of this one, and I want to replace it with this. So anywhere in the model that this material occurs, it's going to replace it with it. So it's such a nice, great one that completely really makes things very, very easy to deal with. So let's get into a little bit more, let's say, advanced editing of materials. Let me just draw this and let's throw this in here. So I have this kind of parquet wood floor, and if I select just the face, so none of my edges are selected, just the face, and I right click on it, you'll see this down here, this texture button. And in here is position, projected, and edit texture image. This edit texture image will open it in Photoshop if you have Photoshop set as the default program, which if you guys need to figure out how to do that, I'll show you later. So you can open this in Photoshop, edit it, and then once you save it in Photoshop, it'll auto reload into here. And I think we've talked about that before. And in fact, this is the actual texture. This has been edited here, I believe, in between the hue, saturation, and lightness. So this is opening up the base image. But if I were to come in here and just draw something and like I wanted to edit or save it or whatever, and I click save, and as soon as I jump back into my model, you can see that that automatically updates. And I can go back into Photoshop, you know, get rid of that, save, jump back into here, and that's gone. So it creates this semi-dynamic link between Photoshop and SketchUp, which is really nice. And you can actually see that it got rid of the saturation and lightness changes that I originally had, which were just here and here, you know, doing something like that. But in fact, let's just go back to reset color, just to have a little brighter. So right clicking on it again, going back to texture, that's edit texture image. Projected we'll get to in a minute. And position, if you guys have never used this, there's actually two different ways that you can use this, what was it called? Sorry. Yeah, the position button. It comes, sometimes it starts off as these fixed pins, and sometimes it starts off as these. And in here, this red one is a move. So you see I can grab this and move my texture around. And this actually might make a little bit more sense. Let me try it on here. And in fact, let me change this to a stone. Not you. Come on. Let's say something like this. And so I'm going to go to texture and position. And even though you can grab this one, and that's grabbing this by its origin, and that's what this one really is the origin. You can also just click anywhere and move it, you know, because maybe sometimes you want to perfectly line up a grout line or something with an edge. That, you know, so if you want, if it's really important that this one started right there, either way, this is just how you can adjust the mapping, the position of the mapping. This green one here will adjust the angle. It actually scales it too, but if you see this blue line, this blue angle line, that's a 1-to-1 with an angle. If you go less than it, it angles and scales, or more, it angles and scales up. So you can actually come in here and say I want to angle it, and that's how you could angle it. You right click and say done, or if you click escape, it actually undoes what you just did. This one here will create more of like a distorted kind of projected effect, as if you're creating like a perspective. And we're actually going to use this in a little bit. And you can see it's actually giving me my origin snap to go back to. And then this one will distort it in the looking more like a rhombus type of idea. So depending on what kind of editing you need to do, these are the different ways you can do it. You can also create using the other pins, so that these will all manipulate it in different ways. But if you go to these white pins, if you click and hold, it'll distort it in 2 dimensions, and you can see that, and we're really going to get into this in a minute. So I'm going to undo that. But if I left click and don't hold, it actually picks the pin up, and I can place the pin wherever I want. So say right there, I'm going to grab, say, this one. Actually, let's see, I put that in the wrong place. So I'm just going to kind of outline, say, this block. And then from there, now I have these pins on all 4 corners of this one specific block. So that was clicking and letting go and moving the pin. And then now I'm going to click and hold it. And you can see that I'm really going to really distort this initially. But this is really just going to make you see that now that block that I had essentially outlined now covers that. So these are just different ways that you can manipulate the material to do what you need it to do. I clicked escape, so it actually undid it. Using that concept, if you guys have never used photo matching, it's a really interesting concept. I don't use it a ton, but it's something that I have used for trying to build stuff around my model, either neighbors' houses or whatever. And to show you how to do it, this is 2 pictures of the same little mobile mini container. And I'm going to grab this and I'm going to load it into my paintbrush. And so you can see it's now active. And I'm going to try and map this piece of the wall right here onto here. And I'm going to build this mobile mini real quick. So if I paint it and go to edit this texture, you see that it's just laying this texture on as it would any other texture. And it doesn't really do anything for what we're trying to do. But similar to what I just did to that stone, I'm going to go to my fixed pins, left click and pick up, and now I can position this wherever I want. And I want to hit the top corners, or all of the 4 corners of this mobile mini. And let's see, we're almost there. And now, once I've done that, I now have my pins where I want them. Now I'm going to left click and drag onto the 4 corners of my building. And then I'm going to say done. And just like that, I've now mapped that onto this building. And so you can go through and uh, essentially do this on all four sides, and you could build this up and make it look real. Let's do one more real quick, uh, just to show it. Maybe I'll do this one a little quicker, not to be so accurate. So it's going to left click and let go, and drop, drop. And then left click and drag and put it over the building. And there you go. And so you see, you can do it to all four sides, and you can really make this thing happen. And even though this one's in pretty bright sun and this one's in shade, maybe that's what you want. But at the same time, you can always come here to your edit, and you can actually lighten this thing up a little bit, and make it a little bit closer, or even open it into Photoshop and really do some editing to make it more into the colors that you want and that sort of thing. One more cool thing with this that I don't use a whole lot, but it's something that's definitely pretty fascinating to me. If you see this material, in fact, let me draw just a big outline again. I'm going to B for my paint bucket, and then Alt to make sure that this is my current material, which you can see is. And if I paint it here, this actually picked up the distorted version. I'm going to select this one and paint. So you see that this is still just this image that was brought in and placed over this. What I can do now is I can right click, and just below texture I can say make this make unique texture. So just like you can with components, I can turn this material unique. So if I click it, there's now a new material in my material browser that is simply just what is here. And again, I'm going to load this into my paint bucket and then paint it here. And so you can see that this was a new material that was created, and that's what it is here. And so that's something that could be used, if you have a wood or a brick that you want something similar but need to adjust it, you can always paint it and then say make unique and then adjust it the way you need to. Let's see here. The most, if not all, images you'll come across will be JPEGs. But one thing that's really nice is actually dealing with PNGs. So let me see if I can open a PNG real quick. I didn't have one ready, but I think I have one in here. I can always find this stuff when I don't need it. I have Rebecca, those plants that we were using for your big. Do you remember where those were? I think they were in here. I'm just not seeing. Yeah. What am I missing? Oh, I think it's under SketchUp blocks, I think, right? Yeah, that's where it is. Okay. Yeah, SketchUp blocks, and then Dynascape. Yeah, so inside of here, they actually use a lot of PNGs for their stuff. Let's see if there's any. Yeah, here we go. So I'm actually gonna just open this one. So you can see that inside of SketchUp, or not SketchUp, Photoshop, that they have this flower, and you can see that the background's been cut out. And so SketchUp, when you bring PNGs in, it allows for this transparency to occur. So if I come back in here and I'm going to drop in that same PNG, um, even though the scale is obviously way off, you can see that it holds that transparency true, even though this is the outline of the image brought in. It's transparent. The one downfall of dealing with the transparencies and PNGs is when you get into shadows. This one's not even casting a shadow, which I guess is good. I think there's a way you can actually turn shadows on and off on these things. We'll get into shadows another time. But just want you to be aware that you can actually create PNGs that way. And some of the ones that I really use would be creating, say, like a chain link fence, which I believe I have in my basic material set, I think. Or it's under, not colors. I can show you this one. I do, this is a screen, like whenever I'd have to do screen porches. So if you zoom in real close, you see it's a PNG of just these little tiny squares. But it actually really looks pretty good as a screen. So that's just a quick way to build a screen inside of SketchUp. And I know, I think is it under metal? There's another one that's in here that I use to build my fencing on. Yeah, like this one right here is the same thing. This one's built off of a PNG. So it looks like a chain link fence. So anyway, there's lots of different ways that you can use PNGs. Just more to be aware of the different ways that you could bring images in. And then getting on to really the one of the more misunderstood ones is this. If I right click and go to texture, this projected. It's a one not everybody really knows what it is, but I can show you some cool things with it. So on a flat surface and putting something on, it really doesn't matter if it's projected or not. Now if I pull this up, you can see how this wraps around this. So basically it's just applying this same image to here. This is an unprojected texture. And really what that means is if I were to change this to a projected texture, see how it's not selected, but if I change it to projected, it's now selected. And I load this material into my current selection and then paint everything, you can see how this becomes very streaky. And if you've ever had image or textures do this to you when you've done push-pull, it's because your image was set to projected. So the top will look normal and the bottom will look normal, because what it's doing is if you were to essentially take a laser, a pinpoint laser, and shoot it perpendicularly through your texture, it'll take that color and just drop it straight down, which is exactly what you can see right here. So it would take this dot and project it straight down. So all it is this razor's edge, whatever colors this edge was, is what's being projected. And most cases it's not what you want. But what's really nice is, let me see if I can do this real quick. Make a quick topography. Because this is one of the examples as to why it's really, really a useful thing to know. And we're going to get into site drawing and topography, I think, sometime soon after this, just so you know. I'm going to smooth that out. Oops, wrong way. So here I have this hill, and if I were to come in here and paint it a grass, make sure that it is not, yeah, it is currently not projected. And if I paint this thing and look at it from above, and I'm going to turn my hidden lines on, you can see that, in fact, I'm just going to paint it with this wood real quick, just so you can see the lines a little better. You can see that these lines are going every which direction because it's trying to basically look at each triangle on its own and not associated with the other. So this is all over the place. You can really even see it with brick whenever you need to put brick onto, say, landscaping. Now what you could do is take this texture and say, I want this projected. And now this will actually work in our favor. So I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to repaint this with my projected brick. And now, make sure I got the right one. We're projected. I'm going to load this in, select everything. So now when I paint it and turn everything off, you see that my bricks are all moving in the proper direction. So if I were to look at this from above, it all looks normal. But if I come down here, you see that it's all working in the planes that it's supposed to. So if you've ever come across an issue where you're working on topography or whatever and your images aren't being projected right, that's why. And in fact, let me let me see if I can download an image real quick. Just grab this. Desktop. There we go. And there we go. So if we have like a landscape plan and you're trying to project it over on top of your model, you can see that this came in as projected, which is nice, but I'm actually going to unproject it. And if I were to paint this, you can see that it goes all over the place, and there's no way to really see how the landscape plan or a map or whatever goes over your topography well. But if I were to change this back to projected and then painted this, you can see now that it actually fits on there properly. So anyway, that's just really the importance of projected. In fact, do one more, I think, fun thing. If I do this, and let me see here. Let's see if I can grab another image. Desktop. And so now, if I want this to wrap around here, I can basically do the same thing that we were just doing, but kind of in reverse. I need to rotate this. And so you can put this where, you know, kind of precisely where you want it. And maybe I'll scale this down. There we go. I'm just going to pull this out and explode it. And then here, if I come back here and say texture, it's set to projected, which is what I want. I now can paint this. and now you can see how that wraps around. You can see it gets a little weird because from here to here, again, if this was a laser beam going through, this lines up perfectly with that. Uh, yeah, so here you would just grab move this over here, say, then just paint here so you can have just whatever part you need, get the idea. But that's how you can actually paint stuff onto circles if you've never had to deal with that before. Yeah, I think that's really about it. I mean, there's a lot to this. We went over a lot, and this is probably something that would be worth going back and watching everything and kind of practicing everything. Um, but these are a lot of the pitfalls that I've come across in trying to deal with textures. Here's actually one more. This one's weird. If you see here, this is a properly textured roof, and you can see how, each turn they're perpendicular to the next. But for whatever reason, and I still haven't figured out exactly why, like when I select this and go to paint, it's essentially painting it projected. It's everything we just talked about. In fact, I'm not even sure, is it projected? Yeah, it's not even set to projected, but you can see it's acting that way. And I can click here and say reset position, which puts it back at default. But what's weird too is if I try to load this into my paintbrush, there you go, worked on that time. It doesn't always work. That sometimes you need to just retexturize it. But it doesn't happen to me a lot, but it's definitely been happening more than it has recently, where it just kind of paints these textures on weird, and it's based off of something that I still haven't figured out. So I don't know if you guys have ever run into that. But just know that you can always right-click and go to reset position, and that puts it back at its default location and everything. And that's how you can fix that. So that's the down and dirty, some basic stuff on textures and some slightly more advanced stuff on textures. And hopefully it's solved some of the problems that you guys may or may not have come across in doing work, and can see how to use some of these things. Creating textures in Photoshop is a whole other class. Not even sure if that's something we'll do in here, maybe another time. But I will show you one trick. I think I showed this to Rebecca and she liked it. You can grab, this is something I was working on that I'm done. So let's say we look for a stone material. Oops. And we come across something that we like. Say we really like this. And this happens a lot. Like this looks like it's actually from a Eldorado stone, a stone provider. Well, they'll take pictures of stones, and they're great pictures of the stone, but they're not tileable, so they're not really usable. But a quick way, especially if it's just like kind of down and dirty, just trying to do something. Which one did I just download? There it is. What I like to do, way too zoomed in. If you go to image size, and this one is a pretty small one, 320 by 192. In your head, whatever this size is, I just divide it by half, and it doesn't even have to be exactly half, but just close. So this one is 160, and this one would be what, 85, we'll call it 86. So 160 and 86 is half. And the reason why I need that is if you go to filter, other, and then offset, and you type those numbers in here of 160 and 86, I believe it is, you can see that it basically just shifts the image, and what happened is this right here, this center, is now where, and it's actually right there. This was the, say the edge, the bottom and the right edge of the image, but I was now able to put it in the centers. So with that, I know that this image is now tileable around my edges, but I still have this problem here of getting rid of the edges that are now on the interior. And just with a couple of quick strokes using the stamp tool, say, you can come in here and really just start to blur this edge. Even just grabbing, say, these grout lines at first. And this is definitely one of those things where you can spend a lot of time or spend a very little time to make something look good, but it's really a nice quick way to try and get rid of this edge here. Even just doing a couple of these quick strokes, you can see that edge just really goes away. And now if I save it and drop it into and explode it, and then now if I paint something, you can see it's already, just with those quick few strokes, is already much more tileable than what it would have been. And in fact, I'm going to go back here, save, and bring in, this is what it originally was. Let's see if I can get a similar scale. Yeah, so here you can see these lines right through here and how not tileable it is, but just by those couple quick strokes, that's how you can make some quick tileable textures. So it's a pretty quick and easy way of doing it, and again, you can spend a lot of time or a little time. That's pretty much everything I know about materials, or at least as far as SketchUp's concerned. Any questions you guys have? Any problems you guys have run into that you want to know more about? To make Photoshop the default, where is it at? It is, yeah, I'm trying to remember where preferences. I don't go to this stuff much anymore. Is it window? Yeah, window preferences. And then here, window preferences, and then if you go to, I believe, programs, applications, default image editor, if you click choose, you just have to be able to find where your Photoshop.exe is, and really it should be in this exact same place. It should be under C, Programs, Files, Adobe Photoshop. I only have CS51. You guys have a different one, so it'll be a different Photoshop name. But if you just click on, whatever yours is, so you go here and go Adobe, and again, mine is CS51, and I think you guys are on what, CS7 or something like that, or whatever it's called now. I don't even know, but you would just click on that and then just find this .exe file and click open, and that would make, and that makes that the default editor. You obviously have to have Photoshop on your machine for that to work, but yeah. So basically doing linear arrays. So there's a couple different ways. So I'm going to move this 200 feet. So I have 200 feet between here. And so there's, and I say I wanted a line every 25 feet. Okay. There's two ways you can actually do it. You can either copy this 25 feet, and if you see in the bottom right down here, I'm typing in 25 feet, and I press enter. Uh, I haven't done anything else. I'm not clicking the mouse. I'm not pressing any other keys. I'm still technically in the move command. And while I'm in the move command, I know that within 200 feet divided by 25 feet is 8. I've already drawn 1, so I need 7 more. So if I hit 7x, that adds an additional 7 copied at 25 feet. Now, what's really interesting is I'm actually going to undo that and say I wasn't great at math and I did 25 feet. And I was like, you know what? I want to go all the way across, but I only need 5 more. And I hit 5 more, and I realized that I'm a few short. I still haven't hit any other key. I still haven't clicked the mouse. So I'm still within the command. And if you still see on the bottom right, it says 5x, because that's what I last typed in. I can actually type 7x, and it adjusts it. So you can do it as many times as you want. I can hit 20x, and I'll add in 20 of them. You know, go, nope, that's way too much. I just need 10. Nope, I just need 7. And then you can say, you know what? I want these at every 20 feet, not 25 feet. So I can actually still type in 20 feet, and it's going to adjust the spacing. But you see I need a couple more, so I'm going to go 9x and add those in. So you can really play around with both the spacing and how many you space with. So I can say, you know what, I really want 10 feet apart, so I'm going to type in 120 for 120 inches. But I also need to add in a lot more now and match it back up. So that's using the addition sense, if you will. But there's actually you can do the exact same thing, but by dividing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this one all the way to the end. So I'm copying it 200 feet. And now instead of hitting X, I can hit the divide button. So I can say if I want them every 25 feet, 25 into 200 is 8. So I can hit 8 and then the divide, which is the icon that's right above the number 8 on the number pad. So the bottom left to top right, that divide. And if I hit 8 divide, enter, it's going to divide it into 8 equal segments. And just like before, I can say, you know what, I don't want 25, I want 20. So I know 20 into 200 is 10. So instead of 10 or instead of 8, I'm going to type 10 divide, and it divides it into 10 equal segments. And similar, I copied this over 200 feet. I can say, you know what, I only want to deal with 50 feet. So I type in 50 feet, and I want 5 divisions. So I can really manipulate how that all works. And where this is great, in my opinion, is I make a component out of a column, and I want a column from left to right. And you always want, when you're dealing with columns, you always want an odd number of bays, so an equal number of columns, because you always want a bay in the middle. So I'll divide this by 3, and so you see I get 4 columns and 3 bays. And say, you know what, that works. Or say, no, I want 5. I want to do division of 5. I really want to make this look monolithic or whatever. So this is a great way that dealing with columns. And the other way that really works well is if you have a house and you have a bracket and you make this your component. I'm going to say I want my bracket all the way to here. And now, before I let go, if I look at the bottom right, this is telling me that this is 216 feet from end to end. I go, okay, so I want 20 feet, roughly 20 feet divided, between every bracket. Obviously, the scale's way off. But this is roughly, it's 216, so we'll call it 220, rounding up. And that's, if I want 20 feet, that's, 11? So if I do 11 divide, I now just placed brackets evenly across the eve of my house. So that's just a really great way of being able to do that. Um, and lastly, I'll do the same thing of, I'm going to give, say, a center point right here. Everything we just did linearly, we can actually do with rotation. So I'm actually going to say copy this, and I'm going to rotate it 360 degrees, which actually puts it back on top of itself. But now if I go 8 divide, it's going to divide it into 8 equal angular segments. And then I can say, you know what, I don't want 360 degrees, I really meant 180 degrees, so I'm typing 180, and now it's dividing 8 equal segments amongst 180 degrees. And again, this works well with columns. If you have, say, a half round porch or something and you need to put columns on it, this is a great way of doing it. So again, that was the division, and you can do the same thing that we just did, using multiplication instead of division. Say, I want to rotate this 20 degrees and I want 8 of them. So 8x at 20 degrees. So it all depends on if you know where you want to start and end, or if you just know you want X number forward. But it's really the same concept between multiply and divide. It's just obviously doing it either frontwards or backwards, if you will. Does that answer what you were looking for? The Enscape PNG problem, I haven't, or at least not an easy one. And because what's interesting is Enscape recognizes some PNGs properly and some it does not. Uh, what I have done, and I believe worked if I remember correctly, is I've gone in and edited the material. So basically selecting it, and just like we talked about, you can click on this and edit the texture in Photoshop, and basically just opening it in Photoshop and then saving and reloading it back in. So I'm not really changing anything, it's just resaving the PNG. And I believe, it's been a while since I've tried it, but I believe that worked and updated the PNG to be properly seen by Enscape. If not, there's, I can't remember if it was simply just that, or if under image I had to change the mode. Like maybe that particular image was indexed and it needs to be RGB or something to that effect. It's somewhere, some combination of these little tweaks that made it work, and you kind of had to do it individually. But really what we should do is make a list of any ones that aren't working and go and fixing the core component. This way, anytime we need to use it, it's ready to go. But we can mess with that later a little bit more and figure out the exact solution. But I have fixed it, but it's not it's not a global fix, I should say. It's an individual fix. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Guys, good? Too much information? All right, guys. Thanks. Talk to you guys later.